Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Barth, and today we're doing a podcast on speaking truths. And I've got Dennis Hedke with me today, and Dennis and I are going to start off with just some introductions of who we are. So we'll go through that, and then we're going to be speaking about energy today and a lot of the issues that exist in the state of Kansas. So, Dennis, do you want to start with a quick introduction?
Ladies first.
Okay, ladies first here. All right, so Carrie Barth. I'm a former state representative. I was elected twice. I served 1.5 terms, so I was in 3 sessions. And my background is I'm a business person. I'm in the employee benefit space. Work with a lot of companies and employers on helping them save money. And I got really frustrated with everything that happened with COVID and kind of woke me up to what was going on, and I decided to run for office. And in doing so, I met a key constituent who, she knows who she is when I knocked on her door, wanted to tell me about what were some of the issues in the state, which are things you had heard as well. I was living in rural Douglas County, and she also was in rural Douglas County, not too far from me, and found out there was industrial wind trying to come into our area that would have affected us personally as well as them. And it just opened my eyes, and from there, I didn't stop listening to the people, not only in House District 5, but also across the state as to energy issues. And then I wrote a budget proviso about 3 years ago that was on the safety and health effects of industrial wind, solar, hydrogen hubs, and transmission lines. And that really took off. A lot of people were wanting an independent third-party study, and that's how I got to meet you, Dennis, is that we connected, and it was something you were interested in as well. And then from there, Dennis and I, we co-wrote an energy resolution for the state. And that really took off and actually went international, where millions of people got to see it across the globe. And people were really interested that there were people that were considered to be politicians that care about this stuff. So, Dennis, do you want to take it from there?
Well, thank you, Carrie, for bringing us this opportunity to share many things with the people that we care a lot about. There's so much to talk about in the domain of energy and infrastructure and all the factors that come into play when you're trying to keep the lights on for citizens and to keep them engaged and to try to push back on the forces that want to harm us with increasing rates for electricity in particular, and so many other areas where if we don't keep our eye on the ball, we can really get behind. And we believe, Carrie and I, that there are certainly areas that we can illuminate to shareholders, citizens, and people that may be watching this podcast around whatever the area is. And so I came into the legislature appointed by Governor Brownback after the person that held my seat, District 99 in East Wichita and Andover, Kansas, was appointed Kansas Insurance Commissioner. And so I had been involved in some policy making things in the Wichita area, ran for State Board of Education, lost narrowly. And so I had a clean record, and I got some, exposure to people that were interested. And so went into a district election to fill a vacancy, and I won that election, and I was sitting in the House of Representatives 4 days later. And that was in early 2011. I was appointed that first seat opportunity, but I was reelected twice. And I was able to be the chair of the House Energy and Environment Committee for the last 4 years of my terms of energy and environmental concerns. And so I would say kind of the rest is history. But as Carrie and I both know, once you've been engaged in policymaking and have the opportunity to interact with clients, I call them clients, constituents that continue to want more answers and have questions that they would like to have more detailed answers about. we were blessed to have the opportunity to continue to fill some kind of roles that give the citizens the opportunity to have a voice. And sometimes it doesn't always work out the way we want, but we stay engaged. And so today's subject matter, although it's largely focused on energy policy, also speaks to other matters that are on the sidelines that interact with that subject matter area. And so pleased to be able to have this opportunity to do this.
All right, Dennis, tell us about your professional background and how that ties into what you're doing on the energy sector.
Well, I graduated from Kansas State University with a degree in geophysics way back when.
So say that again. For people that don't know what geophysicist is, can you share what that means?
Okay.
In a short, little, brief, understandable, like for the regular folks out there that are listening.
I am a consulting geophysicist. I'm still active in the business of geophysics and energy. And so I became engaged in that area of interest through Kansas State University and left there with a degree in geophysics in last century. I'm not going to go any more detail than that, but that means that I have a basis in geologic understanding that gives me opportunity to investigate other principles that relate to geology. And the physics part of it comes into play when I had additional math and physics that were required for my bachelor's degree in Kansas State University. I wasn't quite done yet, and so I did pursue graduate school at the University of Virginia, School of Engineering and Applied Science, and had a sub-major, if you will, in materials science. And so that gave me the opportunity to look more deeply at materials and gain a much more intense understanding of what goes on inside of materials. And so I had the opportunity to be engaged in microscopic analysis at the electron microscope level, scanning and transmission electron microscopes, and illuminated my understanding of materials by orders of magnitude. And I left that and moved on back into geophysics and have been there ever since.
So basically, you know a lot more about this on the technical standpoint than I do. So, you know, from my perspective, I listened to what the people shared with me, and I understood like there is a lot of pain in what's happening. It's hurting people in the world of energy. You know, people are saying, well, this is cheap or affordable, reliable, you know, unreliable energy out there. Some say it's reliable, and we know the truth on this because of what happens, what's actually happened in people's pocketbooks. We know based off of people's energy bills. So in general, like, I know what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about the energy issues. We want to talk about, let's start with like, you know, criminalizing of this thing called CO2, carbon dioxide, known as plant food, which I learned back in the day in science class about it feeds plants. Like we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out CO2. And basically they were trying to get rid of CO2, which to me means they're trying to get rid of the human population. And I don't know about you, but in my experience in the legislature, like when I talk to folks, this doesn't know party lines. Like this affects everybody the same. You know, Democrats and Republicans and independents and libertarians all live in areas across the state that this is affected. So that's a topic I want to talk about, like what happened at the Kansas level and what happened at the federal level, and just the simplest terms for people to understand how this even started and what year did this start impacting us here in Kansas.
Thank you for that question. And CO2 has been branded a culprit, as Carrie has mentioned. It's anything but a culprit. It's a very valuable gas and natural product in our atmosphere, and we need more of it, not less. But I want to go back a little bit in history to frame this properly. Back in the 1970s, the world, not just the United States, but the world had some problems in cleanup that needed to happen in water and in air. And so in 1970, President Richard Nixon introduced by executive order this item called the Environmental Protection Agency. And after that, the United States being a global leader, the fallout, if you want to call it that, but the spread of the idea of cleaning things up went across the globe. And it became active in December 2nd of 1970. And then we had an item with United Nations becoming involved in Stockholm, Sweden. In 1972, there was a Stockholm Declaration, United Nations Conference on Human Environment. And the term at that moment was coined as sustainable development. And that's been a regular term that we've understood for decades, literally. And sustainable development in the proper sense would mean that we want to do things that we can do without harming the environment and yet getting the benefits of new technology and all kinds of other opportunities to bring us to the point where we're at and we have a good grip on applications of technology. And so 1972 was the Stockholm Declaration. 20 years later, we had a new thing in Rio de Janeiro called Rio de Janeiro Conference, officially known as the UN Conference on Environment and Development, UNCED. That was June of 1992. So it spread from Stockholm to Rio de Janeiro. So it was obviously becoming a very global understanding and application. And so, unfortunately, at that moment, the word had gotten out, the bad word had gotten out that CO2 was this culprit in the Earth's atmosphere that had to be contained. And if we didn't do that, we're going to melt the planet. The icebergs are going to melt away in the oceans, and all kinds of bad things are supposedly going to happen. But that was one of the most fraudulent conditions that has ever been exposed in the United States and around the globe. CO2 is anything but a harmless product. And I want to read a quote here. That's one of my favorite.
Harmful product. It's anything but a harmful.
Anything but a harmful product. Yes, it's valuable, and we need it. And I happen to be a member of a global entity called the CO2 Coalition. We have scientists, engineers, medical people, all kinds of backgrounds and purposes from around the globe. There are a couple of hundred of us now. We're continuing to expand with a message of truth and a message that illuminates the value of CO2. And
so my friends and family, and everybody in Kansas, we're just out there living our lives. We don't even know this stuff is happening behind the scenes. We don't even know any of this is going on. So then Kansas makes a decision in 2009, to also address this issue of what is the perceived issue that is not really an issue, but they make it one. So that's when things happened here. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the United States Supreme Court had an opportunity to play with this, if you will, discuss it. And they had that opportunity because the state of Massachusetts, along with about 9 other states in America, sued the Environmental Protection Agency that had been created in 1970 and said, "You're not doing enough. You're not doing enough to protect us. And we think that more control needs to be applied, and we think that the Rio de Janeiro Convention properly identified this culprit called CO2. And so next thing we knew, the U.S. Supreme Court in 2007 was handing off a football and put it back in the state's controls and opportunities to manage this CO2 culprit. And in an entity or in an trying to think of the right word here, an action. It stated that CO2 was endangering the planet. Inside the Obama administration, a new term became available, endangerment finding. And so that has been the case up until just recently. The endangerment finding governed the actions that could be taken against CO2 to purportedly protect the world and And so that's where that really got started. And it filtered into, of course, the Kansas legislature. Everybody was only too happy to start managing CO2. And in our case, in the state of Kansas, our legislature, loaded up with Republicans, passed legislation that brought into play management of CO2 and other, quote, harmful substances. And we had renewable portfolio standards introduced in legislation.
Okay, so when I first started learning about CO2 and hearing about this, and I'm like, well, there must be a super high percentage level of CO2 in our atmosphere in order for us to have this level of concern. And Dennis, you pointed me to a resource that you call the gold standard resource out there. It's in Hawaii, I believe, where they researched this. Is it called the Mauna
Loa volcano?
The Volcano Study Center, where they actually look at this. And I was thinking it was like some big percentage, and it ended up being like 0.0 whatever percent or something really, really low in the atmosphere. And then Kansas, I found when I did my research there. So like, I think it was 2007 maybe that the legislature passed a bill or two, and it was on carbon capture, carbon sequestration, and these carbon credits and things like that Kansas was going to give people for doing these types of things in the state of Kansas, which kind of like just kicked things off in all the other issues we're having now in the state of Kansas that's driving up energy rates, unreliable energy. So from there, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to like Kansas or even like at the federal level, because we have these bills on there that I think are hurting us right now that are still in existence today.
I'm going to back up just for 1 second. It wasn't 2007. It was later than that, because in 2009 we passed the mandates. But after that, people kept looking at opportunities to control and capture carbon. Carbon, not carbon dioxide, but carbon, okay? Carbon is one of the components of the compound CO2. One carbon atom and two oxygen atoms, two oxygen atoms that compose the molecule of CO2. And so, but I want to back up for 1 minute because it's important for context to be reminded. And the context about CO2 was stated very, very succinctly and accurately by a scientist at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Professor Richard Lindzen, came up with a quotation. And I just want to reiterate, some of the facts that are contained in this whole observation of CO2. What historians will definitely wonder about in future centuries is how deeply flawed logic, obscured by shrewd and unrelenting propaganda, actually enabled a coalition of powerful special interests to convince everyone in the world that CO2 from human industry was a dangerous, planet-destroying toxin. It will be remembered as the greatest mass delusion in the history of the world that CO2, the life of plants, was considered for a time to be a deadly poison. There is no way I could have possibly stated that better myself. Thank God for Richard Lindzen. He's still alive, and he's still influencing policymaking. But as I mentioned, we had this new thing that came out in the Obama administration, endangerment finding, and we were just about ready to the point where we can thank God for some many miracles, M-I-N-I miracles, that have now started to become understood in policymaking and moving us in a new direction. And Chris Wright, Energy Secretary, and the EPA Administrator, Lee Zeldin, have managed to assist the United States in coming around to understanding the flaws in the endangerment finding and the trillions of dollars, not millions, not billions, but trillions of dollars that have been sucked out of the global economies to chase CO2 out of the atmosphere. It's a preposterous suggestion. And so now, as of a couple of weeks ago, Lee Zeldin introduced the extinction of the endangerment finding. And there's a 440-page document that outlines what needs to happen in order for us to get back into reality, get the truth, and start making policy that helps people get understanding and truth and reestablishes global benefits and opportunities economically for third world countries, the entire continent of Africa that has been prohibited from having the opportunity to extract their own minerals, their own, hydrocarbons and other factors that can bring them into a place where they can finally get the lights on and educate their people.
So that's a ton of money. And you mentioned something also, it's highly concerning. Spending all that much money, and then people are like, well, why is my energy rates going up and not down? Why am I having to spend so much on a regular basis when I'm just trying to live in my house? I'm trying to be able to afford the taxes on my house, which I think is a huge problem across the board that needs to be addressed. And then I'm having these energy bills, and everybody says, oh, this new energy that they're pushing, right? The alternative energy, things like wind and industrial wind, industrial solar. Yet every time they put something in, then you got a new transmission line coming across people's property. You got new substations going in. Now that is not reliable, so now you got to build a battery storage facility to store the power to be able, because when you have base loads of certain times a day where the energy peaks are higher, users are using more, you got to have enough available, but yet their bills keep going up. So you want to talk about that, and then I want to circle back around to what happened when I was in the legislature and what our majority-led Republican Party voted for and did that I was not in agreement with, because it is continuing to create and escalate, snowball these problems that we're seeing that need to be addressed and fixed. So you want to talk about some of the issues you've seen and how this unreliable energy is causing us to have the issues and problems, and how our rural Kansas land is under attack?
I'm going to start my answer by bringing a little history into the foreground here. I have 2 children and 5 grandchildren that live in the Dallas, Texas area. In 2021, Winter Storm Uri came down from the Arctic, and it brought temperatures to Houston, Texas that they had never seen before. And in the midst of that, when the temperatures plummeted, the wind stopped blowing, and other things happened. The natural gas could not flow because natural gas industry had converted their delivery systems from natural gas powered systems to electrical powered systems. And the electricity went dead. We had blackouts, brownouts, and other factors. So the net result of that single storm caused many hundreds of people to freeze to death in Houston, Texas.
I remember reading about that, and I remember the numbers were really pretty high, but they said that probably didn't even account for other deaths that were happening because people were without power in the coldest time they've ever experienced in a part of the country that doesn't usually see these lower weather, when we were told that CO2 issues were going to cause us to have global warming. Instead, we have some of these other issues where it's the opposite of that.
Well, here's what we know. The sun rises in the morning and it sets at night, okay? So if you have solar power trying to guide the grid in certain areas, you have a big problem. And they found that out in Texas because they had solar power attempting to come into play. The other factor is that the wind does not blow all the time. And it blows prolifically at certain times of the day, and it goes dead. The same thing happened in Uri with the wind. It went dead. And so we have unreliable, intermittent sources that are trying to be placed inappropriately, forced into the grid in the United States. We have hell to pay yet to come if we don't start figuring out a better way to manage the grid and to reestablish base load power. And in the case of Kansas, that means nuclear, coal, and natural gas. Those three are base load power generators. And in the case when the wind dies or the sun sets and you don't have any evening energy being created from the sun, then you have to use substitute power from especially natural gas, peaking units, which are very expensive to operate and which can only run at certain periods of time. And they'll go down, and then the base load in nuclear and coal-fired power plants can reestablish themselves and kind of take up the slack. But we do not need more intermittent, unreliable sources of energy trying to guide the grid in Kansas or any other state in America.
Yeah, I agree. And, I've talked to other policymakers about things that we could do. Things like reutilizing some of these older facilities that they maybe are going to look to retire because they are old, they are worn out, and they may need to be either completely repaired or rebuilt, and utilizing land that's already in existence versus going to some other part of the state where people buy houses, make investments in their life, expect a quality of life, and not to be impacted with these new types of energy sources out there. What are your thoughts about just even where they're placing these and siting these things and how that whole...
The United States needs a lot of power to run its industry and to provide homes with lights at night, energy to heat the homes that we have, and all kinds of reasons for us to be on track and ahead of the game when it comes to power consumption. And so data centers are becoming very prevalent in this country. And the thing about a data center is you must operate it 24/7. If it goes down, it creates big problems. And so now we're trying to figure out how we're going to run these data centers, how are we going to power them up, keep them powered up. And one of the solutions, if you want to call it a solution, is battery energy storage systems, BESS. I think I would shorten it to BS, personally. But that's the reality of what we're coming upon.
Well, and the Kansas legislature last year had a bill that was to provide incentives for these battery storage facilities, and it passed, regardless of the fact that, I voted against it because I don't feel like they should be given special treatment or incentives to help this industry, that there are other options and choices. And so when you're talking about incentives and things like this happening, it's really backwards, upside down what they're doing. And these incentives are out there for wind, they're out there for solar, and pretty much a lot of these energy sources that are really upsetting a lot of people across Kansas and across the globe. We're not unique here in the United States even in this issue.
Well, in the State of the Union address, a week ago today, or a week ago tomorrow, the president made a very strong comment to the effect that if we're going to power these 24/7 systems, we have to figure out a new way to do that. And the new way I'm proposing is to let the Amazons, let the Facebooks, Meta, whatever they happen to be, provide their own sources and not foist upon the citizens extra charges for the data and energy that they're consuming. And so he made the comment. It'll be very interesting to see what actually happens in the states and even the pushback that may come from the Metas and others that haven't really thought about doing that. But to their credit, some of the people out there are thinking ahead. For example, they want to reestablish power coming from 3 Mile Island nuclear facility. And that's a good idea. More power to them. Bring it on. But that's the exception, not yet the rule. And so we do have to get a grip on how we do contend with AI and 24/7 power delivery to these needed systems. At least we think we need them today, and I think we will agree that we're going to need that.
Well, they already exist and have been for years now in existence. There's just a big boom for even more of them, and it's at an astronomical level compared to what it's been. There's not a lot of rules, there's not a lot of regulations, there's not a lot of information out there. People who are concerned about the environment, there's really not protections out there for folks. One of the things with being a legislator that I was not aware of, and this goes back to, we had a wind turbine out in Marshall County, Kansas, blade that broke. And those blades and how they're constructed, when they break, and I had pieces from this blade, it's like fiberglass, it is fiberglass pieces that are in there, and those shards are like pins and needles. And they went all over and blew thousands, like up to couple thousand or so feet away from that. It blew into the hayfields, to farmland, onto the roads, and people had cattle there where they had to move the cattle off the field. And so I was talking to like the federal level EPA, I was calling FEMA, I was calling the state level SEMA, calling our Kansas Health and Environment, talking to the water, and you name it, trying to figure out like, what do we have in place to provide protections? How do we clean this up? There's nothing. They don't have anything in place. They literally called the company that was responsible for this, which happened to be NextEra Energy, and they were doing some things to clean up the area, but that person, and to make them whole, which I don't know if that person was ever made whole in this scenario at all, but if we take this to everything that we're doing, so I talk about data centers being the new thing right now, like there's no protections. We're talking about energy, but this goes into water. You and I have talked about the water issues related to data centers, which that was not addressed in the presidential State of the Union. A lot of people have talked to me about that as a concern that it hasn't been talked about yet. So I know you probably have a lot to unpack on this with what's going on with that, and how is this going to impact communities with the energy load that it's going to take to run these thousands and even like millions of
gigawatts of power required.
Square footage, millions.
Gigawatts. We're like, to power your home, you pay a bill for kilowatt hours, okay? 1,000. Mega is million. Giga is 1,000 million. Billions of watts of power that are required to take the energy and place it where it belongs. And so, yes, there's a tremendous amount to unpack here, but I'm gonna back up a little bit and remind people how important Mother Nature is in this whole domain of processing. And we have had events in multiple states where solar power facilities have been destroyed by Mother Nature. And in the case of Scotts Bluff, Nebraska, southwest corner of Nebraska, a hailstorm hit that city and wiped out a relatively small solar installation that was used kind of for a backup purpose. About 20 acres in extent. And the pictures that appeared after that storm are spellbinding. And one of the things that also occurs when you break through the cover of a solar panel, you have toxins that are released. And they can be very toxic and very damaging. Cadmium, arsenide, all kinds of different things that can become embedded in the groundwater systems underneath the panels.
Well, it's not even just that, it's the piers. So these panels don't even, it's what goes below the ground. So the piers. I know what was in House District 5 was the West Gardner, East Douglas County, 3,000 plus solar complex that they were wanting to put in. And I think it was like somewhere in the hundreds of thousands of these piers that were heavy zinc, which I think is a lesser expensive think that's right. Zinc, I think, is what it was. Less expensive material to put into the ground, but going deep in the ground, hundreds of thousands of these, constant pile driving to get them in there. So a total annoyance would be potentially total annoyance to the neighbors where these things are going in other areas. And that environmentally as well was found out from a study in, I think it was California, that these are harmful to the earth, to the soil, because they leach that zinc, and the earth is not meant to have that much in it. So, even if you're looking at, what is it called, the agrivoltaics, yes, that those, that they're wanting to do that. I'm like, well, what if you've got that much zinc underneath the land, and that is not going to be conducive for growing any type of ground coverage at all for an animal to eat and graze off of? I mean, I just don't know. It's absurdity and insanity. So you just can't even explain the things sometimes that happen. So
there's no question that toxins were released into the soils and even into the groundwater system.
And how many miles? I mean, you're talking about miles of driving with these solar panels being in existence.
Well, in that case, it was relatively small installation.
That was a smaller one.
20 acres. But we have much larger facilities in other states that have been destroyed again by hail or tornadoes.
And we're Texas, a tornado state here in the Midwest.
Texas had a huge hailstorm that encompassed about 3,000 acres. We've looked at tornado trends over many decades. We've looked at hurricane trends over many decades. And those natural disasters, in the case of Florida, not like they never had hurricanes, they experienced a tremendous damage to a solar installation because of Hurricane Milton. Okay, wiped out swaths of solar panels. They had no ability whatsoever to withstand a hurricane force. In Texas, Fort Bend County, thousands of acres of solar panels were destroyed in a hailstorm. And in all of these cases that I've just mentioned to you, I did some investigating in agencies that should be the equivalent of the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. And I tried to drill down and understand what sorts of actions were taken after the damage occurred. What kind of monitoring, what kind of backward-looking, facilities management had been taken into account. And in each one of the cases I've just mentioned, with the exception of Florida, I haven't quite drilled on them yet, but in Texas and Nebraska, the agency people that I talked to, at the end of the day, told me that the management of the investigations was being handled by the operators. That is the owners and the managers.
Okay, wait a second. So the operators are in charge of what they do or don't do in the cleanup process that does or doesn't happen?
Yes.
So they get to determine if it's not we do the minimal amount. They say that's okay. Nobody else is managing it. Nobody is going to verify if that was enough.
The state of Nebraska and the state of Texas, people that I spoke with on the phone, inquiring about what actions they were managing and trying to take, looking back into and trying to understand the damages that were inflicted upon the systems, the water systems, whatever system involved. Each of the cases referred the cleanup activity and management to the operators and owners of the facilities.
It makes absolutely zero
sense. Foxes guarding the hen house,
yeah,
to say the least. So,
and how do we get here, right? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, who's making these decisions that these things happen? And, there's people that live around there that are impacted by this that have to also be subjected to these things, not just the land where it happened itself. And
I'm going to fast forward a little bit,
okay,
to try to get kind of down to the bottom of that question. How did we get here? What's going on? In the little old state of Kansas, we got a little old county called Bourbon County in eastern Kansas that to this day is being impacted by data centers that came into being because former operators of natural gas wells that had been plugged and abandoned in the past, some deals were made by former operators transferring ownership and opportunity for exploration, if you want to call it that, or exploitation of the natural gas wells in order to convert the natural gas that had been plugged and abandoned to unplug and reopen natural gas wells that were then feeding the energy required to run generators to create power for AI that's in the vicinity of these facilities. In that case, I did some investigating in Kansas. We have this place called the Kansas Corporation Commission that does monitor and manage a lot of activity in the oil and gas areas. And I tried to find out what they were doing in the case of Bourbon County. And this is a few weeks back, and I haven't been able to circle back and find out what's actually happening there. But my understanding, the best I could get it at that point in time, was that we do not yet find any fault with what's going on with the operators. And so we are watching it, and we're going to take action if necessary. But right now, that nothing had been taken, and that's in Bourbon County.
And this in Bourbon, when you say it's in Bourbon County, we're talking about this is in rural
Southeast
agriculture area. We're not talking about an industrial zoned area, right? Like, this is the other problem with all of these things we've been talking about, is that they're taking agriculture zoned areas and taking it and making it into industrial without actually going through a planning or zoning sometimes. And they're not changing it to industrial. They're doing conditional use permits on a lot of this. I don't know if that's the case with the data center in Bourbon County. And then they're plopping them out into some of the most fertile agriculture areas of the state.
Well, where we are right now in my county, Sedgwick County, is action that is attempting to be taken by out-of-state, in this case, 2 cases, both California companies, wanting to come in and work around planning and zoning in Sedgwick County and create new opportunities for data centers and the like. And in my case, there are 2 areas: North Sedgwick County, South Sedgwick County. In the north case, around the city of Colwich, Andale, close by. In the case of the South Sedgwick County area, Clearwater, Kansas, which is very close, as it turns out, to McConnell Air Force Base, and has some issues with being very close to that. And I'm not sure it's feasible to try to do their product work here. But the Sedgwick County Commission is now in a place where it is going to need to determine whether or not they want to allow and permit significant installations that are related to data centers at the outset. But we need to understand that in order for a data center to operate, they have to have power. And right now, where they're proposing this activity in Colwich, they don't have the power. So how do you get the power? Well, they think they're going to use solar panels to power the data centers, which I've just mentioned not too long ago.
Are not reliable. So how's that going to work out?
Sun doesn't shine at night.
And we have tornadoes and
So
hailstorms.
therefore, a data center in Colwich can't just have a data center. They've got to have power supply. They've got to have, if the sun goes down, they have to have storage, a BESS facility to capture the generated power in order for the 24/7 supposed activity to occur in these proposed data centers. And as far as I know, in neither the Colwich case nor the Clearwater case have there been sufficient environmental studies undertaken to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that there's not a high probability for damage. I'm just going to focus on Colwich. Colwich is in the proximity of the High Plains Aquifer southern terminus, which is called the Equus Beds. as a groundwater source that's very important for the city of Wichita. And if something happens, some kind of environmental event like in Sedgwick County, of course, we never have hail. You know, it's forbidden. Hail is forbidden in Sedgwick County. So in the event that the forbidden gets violated, then you have a hailstorm in Sedgwick County. And not only do you have the problem with leaching into the groundwater system, equus beds right there, but you have other potential environmental issues. And so I just don't think we've looked anywhere close to carefully enough at those factors that we should, buy this lock, stock, and barrel and run wild with it. It's appropriate for our commissioners at the county level to be much more cognizant of the multiple factors that can go wrong in these installations. And I, we have a state senator who has come forth with a recommendation to put a 3-year moratorium on any considerations in Sedgwick County. He's being bashed, from what I've heard, by all sides, from all sides, and they can't believe that we would have the gall to try to put some kind of clamps on this action. But I would say that if there's ever been a time for the state of Kansas to stand up, stand firm, and be vigilant, to look very deeply into the downsides of these actions. And I hope that our friends in those positions will properly account for all of the risks that are potentially going to be engaged in these facilities. And the other thing that bothers me tremendously about both of these facilities in Sedgwick County, Kansas, that are under consideration is that they don't need the power, other than the data centers that claim they need the power. Okay? A lot of the power that's being generated for all of these other solar installations and what have you are not going to be consumed by Kansas citizens. They're going to go to the West Coast. The West Coast is desperate for energy. They're begging for power lines to be constructed that'll move that power out of Kansas to California, Oregon, and Washington. And I'm sorry, that's a no-brainer for me. That's unacceptable transaction consideration, and we just need to stop it.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about there means it's going to impact a lot of people's homes, their property, their value, their health, how they can live or not live, the use of the land or in and around them, because we're going to be pincushioned across the state with all of these things: wind, solar, transmission line. When I was in the legislature, they passed a bill that was to have more reliable energy, natural gas. However, I didn't like this part at all. They were transferring the cost of all of that onto the ratepayer above and beyond what a normal rate would be, which I was highly against. And I don't know, but Dennis and I talk on a regular basis. We want you all just to wake up, listen, to what is going on, to the truths of what's happening here, and stop passing these costs off to the people. We've had bills that have passed, there was a bill that passed, 2 years ago. It was on supposedly lower energy rates. It gave us a decrease of pennies per person on a per month basis, pennies. And I went to the chair of the House Energy Committee. Would have loved to have had you as a chair to work with you on it. It would have been awesome. But went to the person who's the current chair and said, hey, why is this date in here? What is going on? What does this mean? Well, I don't know. I think that has something to do with the stock, because this was what I call kind of an Evergy bill. And it talked about lowering our rates. And I said, well, is that a loophole? Is that the way they're going to actually increase our rates at that date and time? I'm not kidding. That bill passed. Everybody voted for it because it was going to lower rates, even though it was pennies. It wasn't going to actually offer any real relief to anybody. It was just going to give politicians the ability to say, oh, look at us, we lowered your rates. And I don't like these games. I don't play games like that. I like facts, I like data, and I like truth. And so literally the day the governor signed the bill, the next day, Evergy filed for a rate increase of a massive amount, over 10%, with the Kansas Corporation Commission. And they had big, huge hearings. And I'm like, the games that get played need to stop because they're not helping us. The policies are not working. You know, the fact we passed these bills to give incentives to these things are now hurting the people that are fighting these things. It's like, why did this happen? How did this happen? Well, we've got a Republican supermajority, Senate and House. We've got a Democrat governor and lieutenant governor. And everybody's like blaming everybody, but it's everybody. It's those leadership folks that are pushing these things through that have got to change. And it's people like us that have got to start pushing out the truth to everybody to demand better, because what we're doing today is not working. I don't want people to be hurt. I don't want people to be pushed out of their homes because they can't afford their energy rates. They can't afford to pay taxes on their homes. And so I just really greatly appreciate everything you've done. This makes me a little fired up talking about these things and how it really affects people's lives on a day-to-day basis. I've learned so much from you in the last 3 years that I've known you. You've become a good, dear friend, and so I appreciate what you do in this space, and I don't want you to stop. So thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for you and your persistence. I want to end with one fact, okay? And this fact comes out of my file cabinet in my home, because I keep files on Evergy's bills. In 2009, when the renewable mandates were passed in the Kansas legislature, my monthly bill coming from, at that time, Westar, was 9 cents a kilowatt hour. I just took a look last night at my latest bill from Evergy due this month. Guess what the calculation was for power delivered into my home per kilowatt hour this month? 18 cents a kilowatt hour, 100% increase in 16 years. That equates to about 6.5% inflation as compared to the United States average inflation, which is under 3% over the same time period. So those are facts that the citizens need to know. And it's about time that we stood firm and told Evergy and NextEra and whoever else may be wanting to fashion the numbers they need for their shareholders, that the real shareholders are right here in Kansas. And they need to start protecting the shareholders, KCC included in the discussion. Yep. So I can close with that. I like facts.
Same here. So thanks everybody for joining us on this discussion. I mean, we could have talked for hours about this. There's a lot of other things we could have shared and talked about, maybe more to come in the future, but thank you so much, Dennis.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thanks.
Very much.